and welcome to The Public Good. This is Deja James from Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 380 organizations across Western New York to make a better Buffalo-Niagara region. We do policy and advocacy work, we do research, and lately this summer we've been focusing a lot on federal rapid response work and really studying and understanding the impacts of federal changes and federal budget cuts. But as last week's episode showed with the Igniting Hope Conference in Buffalo Center for Health Equity, we also want to talk about the work that's ongoing on the ground in Western New York that we are still very much fighting for and doing to keep hope alive. I'm just going to be honest with you. And so that work is ongoing, including our community agenda. And today I'm really excited to have some members of one of the planks of the community agenda and also to talk about a really special event that we are having or hosting next week, or by the time you see that this week, Saturday, September 13th, correct? And it's going to be a community art crawl that starts at Massachusetts Avenue Project. If you've never heard of it before, really cool urban farm space on the west side of Buffalo. And the art crawl will be going to different locations all over Western New York so that you're able to see some beautiful art installations that local artists have made to donate to local nonprofits and service organizations that are really impacting community in a positive way. And we're going to talk about why that's important to have in community spaces, why community deserves nice spaces, and why community deserves art. But first, I'm going to have all of my wonderful arts guests introduce themselves and their arts affiliation. So I'll start with you, Tiffany.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Deja. My name is Tiffany Gaines, and I am the curator at the Burchfield Penney Art Center, also a artist, photographer myself, and just very grateful for the work that I'm able to do at the Burchfield Penney, celebrating and amplifying the work of our Western New York artists.
Thank you.
And hi, I'm Heather Gring. I'm currently at the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, but I was previously at the Burchfield Penney Art Center for quite a long time. In my personal life, I am now the chair of the board of Locust Street Art. I'm also affiliated with the Buffalo Niagara LGBTQ History Project, little plug for that, and am an active member of Frontline Arts Buffalo. Thank you. Check.
Yeah. And I'm Emma Brittain. I'm the executive director of Locust Street Art and an artist, especially doing some public art projects this summer.
Thank you so much, all of you, for coming today and talking about the arts and why the arts are so important. And I talked a lot about, and in previous episodes and even in today's, that we've been focusing a lot on federal impact and all of the doom and gloom that comes with. But we're trying to recenter a little bit into what are actionable things that we can still be doing in our local communities, because there's other levels of government. Obviously, the federal government impacts those other municipalities, but we want to make sure that people understand what's still going on in their hometowns. And so in this specific instance, we've worked with Frontline Arts Buffalo for a few years now on the community agenda for this plank, Fulfill the City of Buffalo's Annual Commitment to Fund the Arts. And really that has stemmed from an issue of the City of Buffalo allocating money in name and in budget line, but not actually distributing those funds and not making those funds even accessible. And so some changes have happened. We've been doing this advocacy for a few years now, but there still seems to be some type of holdup in that. And the reason why I want to talk about why we are focusing on the arts today is because sometimes it can, especially as we're thinking about all the different federal cuts that are happening right now, people may not have arts at the top of mind. People are scared about healthcare. People are scared about Medicaid. We've had a few episodes on some of those other topics, immigration, and all of those things. But why should we and why are we still fighting for arts funding, holding arts events? And why is that so important for the community to be gathering in events as such? And so I would love, Heather or Emma, if you could talk a little bit about the work, one of the plank that we've been doing, and maybe Heather, you can talk to that issue, and then Emma, if you could talk a little bit after that about the impact that arts has and why we've been fighting for this for so many years, despite whatever's federally going on this year. So I know that's a A mouthful, so I'll let you start.
Well, and I'd actually like to, if it's okay,
Please.
I'd like to actually ask you to speak first about why arts is important, and then we'll talk about why we fight for funding for the arts, if that'd be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's such a huge thing that it's like hard to distill down into one little like segment. You know, the city of Buffalo, the budget's not in a great place, but like the whole reason people visit cities is for food and culture. And the arts are a huge part of that. So, you know, we don't have that funding. We don't have things to bring in more funding, but it's more important too for me for the community aspect, because the arts are such a huge factor in healthy communities. And especially for youth, you know, there's so many people who you can talk to who are prominent artists in the city now, or like up and coming artists who would tell you that art saved their lives. And that's like, we don't get to hear all of those stories. And there's all sorts of different levels of success or impact. But for me, like, I personally know so many people, more than I could count on my hands, who wouldn't be around if they weren't involved in arts programming as a teenager. So that's been a huge pushing factor for me, to see how people grow and, you know, whether or not they ever become a professional artist, the impact that it has on their resiliency and their ability to express themselves and their ability to relate to others. So all things like that, it's just really, really important. Public art beautifies the city, lifts neighborhoods. There's just so many different ways that there's impact. I have a lot of students at Locust Street who have gone on to start small businesses, so that gains them independence financially from having to rely on someone else for a paycheck. And that's been really beautiful to watch, from photographers to ceramicists. Some animators even. Our animation studio is a little bit newer, and that's been really cool to see that grow. The impact is just immeasurable.
Absolutely. And sorry, Heather, because this is just such an important part of this topic, and I love how you said that it saves lives. And even on a personal note, and I'll kind of tie in you, Tiffany, with the Burchfield Penney, because I find that, you know, when the world is chaotic, I find art spaces bloom in a certain type of way. And this year, really specifically, I can't tell you how many events that have been community-led and community-based that the Burchfield Penney has hosted this year. And I attribute a lot of that to Tiffany, to be honest. But there's been so much that has occurred there. And I've gone and seen people the most joyous that and it's so important for us to have joy and to feel like we have a safe space and to have a space of peace.
Absolutely.
And I know I love walking through a museum at some points, because it's just, you get that quiet, the lighting is like nowhere you've ever been in your life anywhere else. You can't get it in your house. You can't get it at the library. You can't get it anywhere else. It's just so beautiful. And like to have that space and for it to actually be open to community. Because then the other part is a lot of art spaces sometimes haven't been necessarily in Buffalo, at least. And so can you talk a little bit how the Burchfield Penney's been able to foster an environment like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, community is integral to our mission. You know, we are a regional museum, and so not only are we dedicated to uplifting the legacy of Charles Burchfield, who was an amazing American master watercolor painter, but also uplifting the artists of Buffalo and the Western New York region. So that idea of community is really at the core of our ethos and our philosophy as an institution. And I think being regionally focused, it gives us such a unique opportunity to really engage with our community, several communities throughout Buffalo and Western New York at a grassroots level, you know, because the artists that we are collecting, the artists that we're exhibiting, the artists that we're collaborating with are all connected to this region, right? And are all reflective of a diverse and rich, culturally rich city and broader area that we live in Western New York. And so for me, as someone who is not native to Buffalo, but has made Buffalo home over the past 12 or so years, it's been so incredible to be able to grow such a rich understanding and appreciation for the cultural legacy that exists here in Buffalo, to be able to celebrate it through the work that I do, and to be a part of finding new ways to expand that reach. You know, welcoming spaces and the community art crawl that we'll be talking about is a new initiative that really lends itself to the ways that we're looking to expand our reach and not just, you know, have people feel that they have to come to the Burchfield to engage with our work, but to meet communities where they are and to have our local artists be accessible in spaces that folks are visiting on a day-to-day and not just when they come to the museum.
Absolutely. And I see your impact just proliferating in that way. And then I also just want to tie in Locust Street, just plug in that for just a second, because what, just a statute of just a community pillar.
It's a pillar.
Right in the fruit belt.
And if I can really speak to that, and I admit, it is very interesting to be here right now and to remember all the little spiels I used to say when I was at the Burchfield. And there is one way of framing it that really resonated for me, especially when I was at the Burchfield as well. Because we're a regional art museum that's rooted within, because the Burchfield is a regional art museum that's rooted within the community it serves, the same artists that are being exhibited are also, you see them at the grocery store, you see them at the PTA meeting. We are all in each other's fishbowl, right? We, especially at the Burchfield. And so I found that space was living community, right? Because no one was in this nice little tower. Everyone was coexisting. And I would sometimes reflect when I was across the street at the AKG and think about, wow, we don't see Ansel Adams at the grocery store, right? We don't see, it's a different relationship. Totally. And so it creates larger institutions, reinforce these hierarchies that kind of just don't exist the same way at the Burchfield. And similarly at Locust Street, right? And so I have to give endless gratitude to the Burchfield because that's how I first met Molly Bethel. I did an oral history project at the Burchfield for over a decade where I interviewed over 100 different living artists at the time. Some have passed on now. And so I interviewed Molly Bethel, and I knew who she was. I knew what Locust Street was, but I didn't have a relationship with either. And it ended up being, I did more interviews with Molly Bethel than I have done with any single person because her stories are endless. And in those same ways, I can actually really see that because of those interviews at the Burchfield that led to me forming a relationship with her. She at the time didn't really have an active relationship with where Locust Street was at that point. I got more involved with Locust Street. I ended up joining the board and over many years drew her back into the fold. So now both she and Olga Lowney, the two founders, previously Locust Street was known as Molly Olga for decades, right? And so now these two founders who at points in their past, as you know, we're all in the same fishbowl, right? So we're all in each other's messes too, right? We're able to actually find new chapters because of these continuing relationships because we're all community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's, honestly, it's not just that it's not like that at larger institutions, it's also not like that in a lot of other cities. Buffalo, we are all neighbors, right?
Yeah.
And I think we do live that. And I think that the arts is a beautiful way where we vibe together. And sometimes people who might not know what to say to each other know how to create art together. So that's taking it a little bit away from some of the Locust Street aspect of it, except for the fact that, I would not be on the board of Locust Street without the Burchfield. And, all of us, I think, become this cumulative effect together. Absolutely. And I think that speaks to, how important this ecosystem is.
Absolutely.
The ecosystem.
The
That's
ecosystem.
really what
That's
it
the
is.
buzzword, the ecosystem.
And the oral histories that you collect, the cultural archiving that you're doing, it's easy for movements and people to be forgotten, right? Especially in mess and in decades of things. And for that to be able to be a space of reconciliation and healing in that way, how powerful is that?
My gosh, it really shaped my life in ways that I still, when I can step back and be like, oh my goodness. And don't you know, is Molly coming tomorrow to Locust Street? So Molly Bethel is quite firm in her pedagogic process when it comes to quality art education. And for her, it's always been very important that Locust Street is not just a place where you go and put some paint on a piece of paper, right? This is not babysitting, right? We're not here to watch kids on weekends when parents want some off time. We're here to offer free, high-quality arts education to anyone who comes to our building, with the caveat that our building is not currently accessible, and that is something that we are working on. We are not currently ADA compliant, and we are working in that direction actively, but it is real hard with the old
buildings.
These old
We're
1800s
dealing with
buildings.
that now as well.
Right.
It's really hard,
Right.
you know.
So
Yeah.
I do really, it doesn't make me proud, but I put that caveat on it that we want to offer art to everyone and be accessible, and yet we're not able to be there yet, because as a Frontline art school that has been serving the Fruit Belt for 60 years, we sure don't have the resources it takes to do that. And yet here we are, and we persist, right?
And that's the biggest thing. And that segues perfectly into why are we funding this space? Why does this space need public tax dollar support?
Honestly, Locust Street is such a good example, because I can tell you, having looked through the books historically. So first let me start by defining what we mean by a frontline arts organization, right? Yes. So a frontline arts organization, and this is the definition coined by Frontline Arts Buffalo's beloved founder, Lorna Hill, who has passed on now, but Lorna Hill of Ujima Theater Company very much was the one who brought us all together. She was our rudder for years, and I think we all still carry on in her stead. But the definition of a frontline arts organization is those communities that are first and worst impacted by socioeconomic, environmental, racial factors, those who are on the front lines of doing that work. And so those frontline communities, these are the arts organizations that help stabilize those communities. One example is the African American Cultural Center, a long-standing frontline arts organization, the organization that our beloved April Baskin came up in, right? She was a child who went to classes both at Ujima and African American Cultural Center. And so I've been talking to some of their staff sometimes, and in the past, I don't know if they still do this, but African American Cultural Center helps people with HEAP applications in fall, right? Because they're helping stabilize their community. At Locust Street, there's been situations where young people have come to us with real difficult conversations and questions that they didn't know how to answer, and they didn't know who to talk to, right? Like big life choices, And they come to Locust Street, they come to African American Cultural Center. And I say this with all the love in my heart, but they don't come to the Burchfield. And they don't go to the AKG, right? Because you don't think about that, right? Like, think about what those different degrees of, like, what the role of these organizations are, right? And so when it comes to, like, health and community well-being, it is our frontline arts organizations who are doing that work every day. So what I can say is about, like, the books and how these organizations continue to exist. I can tell you fully it is because historically the founders of these organizations, they didn't pay themselves if the numbers didn't line up. Many years that both Molly and Olga and Lorna did not pay themselves if the budgets didn't work out, right? And so, like, we can't do that. And I'll be honest, I wouldn't have showed up to my job if I wasn't getting paid, right? Like, it's a different relationship, but it is, I think for me, it just reinforces how important it is to acknowledge that we can't expect the most from these organizations who are already providing the most.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful that we are not in that situation anymore, that we would never ask Emma to have to do that kind of work, to show up unpaid for something that, we don't ask that of bankers, we don't ask that of other people with perhaps more, power within systems.
Absolutely.
Can I just jump in on that really quick? Because I think that really illustrates this misconception that working in the arts, being an artist, being a cultural worker is not seen as labor, right? Or it's easy to think about the work that artists do as this, like, inherently just vibey sort of thing that you should do because you love it. And that your time, your energy spent on thinking through ideas, mastering your medium, your process, your technique, that those things aren't worthy of being fairly and justly compensated, right? And I think that that's a very large misconception in the broader, in the grander scheme of things, that artwork is not work. And actually it's very much so is, and really represents, the, what's the word that I'm looking for? It really represents the current of the way that people are thinking, the way that people are engaging with each other, making sense of things when they're a mess, and that is incredibly laborious. And even if it doesn't always seem that way on the outside, I think that these continued efforts to really push for continuing arts funding, for advocating for its importance, really help dispel that myth that arts work is in fact very much work.
Absolutely. And especially it's this weird thing of you can't expect people to sacrifice when then you're also cutting public safety nets. And then that's the other really hard thing now too, because and then when you're cutting public safety nets, then people need those frontline arts organizations more, even more, right? That's when we are convening. That's when we are doing rapid response. That's when we are just putting together ad hoc food pantries and whatever else we have to do. You know what I'm saying?
And I guess I want to lift up that there are frontline arts organizations that are not here anymore because they weren't able to make it work. Oftentimes not because the will wasn't there, but because the game is often changed mid-play. And when that happens, it is often, our frontline arts organizations don't always have the most political clout, let's say, right? And they probably burn a lot of political clout through having to speak truth to power, right? Certainly there's, Lorna did that a lot. But I want to lift up that like Langston Hughes Center for the Visual and Performing Arts, which was founded within 2 years as the Burchfield Penney. Both small organizations, but one focusing on serving Buffalo's African-American community. And, there's a long story there about why it's not here today, but it is very much a story of our city not serving frontline arts communities the way they deserved. And so I guess, like, in this space, I want to lift up their name, because many orgs have not made it, and many orgs are trying their darndest to keep it all working. And I think that's how mission creep happens sometimes, because you chase the dollars, and you have to, right? But it is always this fine line of saying, okay, are we going to follow the money, or are we going to lose our rudder in doing that?
Right.
And so like a lot of pivoting to workforce initiatives, if that's not necessarily where you were coming from, can pose challenges, So I just lift that up, which is a little difficult.
No, absolutely. It's really important to lift up. And it's just we just did a federal forum last week, a community conversation about, with all these different nonprofits that really have never had their budgets threatened before, right? In a way that now, they're shaking. And and a lot of the things they're saying are everything that you're echoing, but has been said by arts organizations for a while, right? And so it's like, I don't know what fable or old story you can tell of like the person that's like, hey, the sky's falling, and everybody's like, no, and then it's like when it's happening to you, then you're like, oh, this is the reality of this thing, right? And we have to believe people from the from when they first say it, even from the organizations or from the communities that we may not think know what they want or need. And I think there's a lot of like infantilizing of community grassroots organizations and communities in general that make it so when they're saying something for years, nothing happens, or people give some platitudes, or they'll take some pictures and give away some food baskets or whatever they got to do, do the photo op, and then that's it.
Big check.
And then
One
that's
big
it.
check.
One big check.
And I think that's been the problem a little bit with, with the city. I think the city very much uplifts arts and culture. Like, we are the most artsy cultural town. You got to come to Buffalo, tourism, all of that, like upselling Buffalo, all of those things. And so they lean on you all for that. But then when it's time to give support, then it's, oh, well, and why is that shaky like that? That's what I don't understand.
I want to lift up that, and I'm sorry that actually Art Services Initiatives couldn't be here today. We're kind of here in their stead. And so ASI is the organization that is actually lead on the arts plank this year. So FAB has been involved in the background and stuff, and actually we asked ASI to carry the plank this year because we as frontline arts workers do not have the time, right?
That's for sure.
But, and I wish I had these numbers like ready right now, but you can look them up online. But ASI did a economic impact study just within the past few years that shows how much money the arts brings to Buffalo. you know, everything from theater, our thriving theater community, to the visual art scene, to the experimental art scene. You know, there's a lot of cool stuff that historically has been possible here because we've had a smaller city base and more space to be experimental. Torrance Space Theater is such a great example of that, right?
Yes.
Doing cutting edge avant-garde theater. With the support of some degree of community leaders, right? And so, yeah, the arts is what makes Buffalo cool, you know, and I've been here long enough to remember what it used to be like in like 2008 when you could still work a part-time job, have time for your studio work, and be able to afford an apartment.
Yeah.
And that's not possible anymore, right? And so, at all. And so that is actually this other aspect of it too, where it used to be really affordable to be able to live here as an artist. And that is not true anymore. So we have this double whammy of our arts community not receiving the support that it needs across the board, and it's also harder to make it work, you know. So the 1-2 is just,
And you see those communities disappearing, or the light kind of leaving. Like Elmwood Village is not the same Elmwood Village I grew up with. I know we still talk about the name, and we go to the farmer's market, and that's all nice. But it's not like the art I used to see there as a kid would. I mean, there's just something special about that. And there's just a moment you have, especially for me, a young inner city kid who really, art was all I had, like hip hop, you know, all of those things. That's all you know what I mean? It was the only reason I could dream bigger.
I was going to say, it's like a vision of freedom. You know, it's this idea of being able to be true, to stand in your truth of who you are, to be able to experiment, to not, you know, be confined to the restrictions or to the identities that society places on you. You know, when you're in a state of precarity, it's hard to imagine, it's hard to dream when your sole focus is on survival.
and you're stressed all the time.
Yeah.
And it's hard to create together when you're stressed all the
Absolutely.
time, right?
And I think it brings communities together too. Like, one thing that's really special about Locust Street, there's other frontline arts organizations that are more insular and more like one type of, not one type, but like, you know, a little bit less diverse. Yeah, one focus and very like deep into that. Locust Street is so diverse, it's like crazy. So I always think, you know, our ethnic diversity is great, but also, I look at the numbers that people report and their household income, and I'm like, there are not very many times where people who make over $100,000 a year and people who make less than $20,000 a year are in the same room.
Yes.
Right.
And that, I think, is so huge
Absolutely.
for people to be exposed to more opportunities. You know, people who are coming from those low-income houses to make friends with people who have means, because there's a whole other thing of, you know, there's a lot of things that we do nowadays that are like crowdfunded, and if you come from a background where everyone around you, everyone in your neighborhood doesn't have the money, how are you crowdfunding an opportunity to do something more? You're not really, unless you have these opportunities to rub shoulders with people who may be able to support you. But it's also the people who have, being able to see people who don't have as much as them aren't all the stereotypes that they've been hearing. You know, they don't not have these things because they're lazy. They don't not have these things because they're unintelligent. They don't not have these things because X, Y, Z. You know, a lot of life is, you know, opportunity based on just where you happen to land,
The cards
you know,
you're
where
dealt.
you happen to be born.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really crazy that Locust Street is one of those places where I see that happening. And I think that's so powerful. You know, we do free or low-cost art programming, and so people would automatically assume, you know, that's going to be all the people who can't go and pay for a class, but it's not, because we're providing that quality programming. So each year, you know, I would have students while I was teaching who would randomly start speaking in other languages and be like, oh yes, I'm just here for the summer because, you know, I actually live abroad, but I'm here visiting my grandma, and blah, like, you know, they would have these like extraordinary lives. And, you know, then there's the kid that like walks themselves, like the latchkey kid, you know, who walks themselves. Maybe their parent doesn't even know that they're in our programming. You know, they're just fending for themselves in a lot of ways, just because, you know, their parents are busy and they're struggling to make ends meet. And, you know, for those two kids to be together and just have that little bit of like eye opening of like, you know, there's privilege and there's grit. and like, you know, figuring that out as a community and making a better community from that is really important.
I want to tell one more little anecdote about Locust Street's history, which is talk about an ecosystem. So this beautiful Beaux Arts building built in the 1890s. So the way Locust Street came to be there is that actually Locust Street was, Molly Olga at the time was an after-school arts program that had lost the church. The church that it had previously been, had like some classrooms in, was demolished to build the Kensington. So it was already, lost through urban renewal. And I'm sorry, I don't recall what convent of nuns were in that location, but it was like a convent of nuns who let them use the front two rooms. And then a few years later, the order closed and the nuns were leaving Buffalo and the building was being sold. And so the story goes that it was the entire Fruit Belt neighborhood that had tip cups in the barber shops, the bakeries, all the businesses that used to be in the Fruit Belt, which was much more than there is today. And it was the community that raised the $7,000 in the 1970s that it took to buy that building. Because it's not like Locust Street, it's not like Molly Olga had any reserves, right? And so talk about like community invested frontline art support, right? It really was the Fruit Belt who bought that building, right? And so we are here to continue to care for that. And to steward that.
And how important it is to carry that on. Like, what a shame that would be if it disappeared.
And there's been moments that it could have. So, like to be real, right, there has absolutely been huge swings of instability, especially in the past decade. And when I first joined the board, so this is 2016, the first board meeting I joined was held at another board member's house because the power was off in the building because the insurance had lapsed. And so we were like that close. I was preparing to be like, okay, am I joining a board or am I preparing to like transfer this building to the land trust?
Right.
Because we're at that juncture, right? Yeah. And so, oh gosh, what incredible things we've been able to do to continue to exist today. So anyway.
A lot of creativity.
A lot of
grit.
Yeah, a lot of grit.
Yeah. Tiffany, did you want to add something to that? No. I think we've hit the nail right on the head on why public investment is so important. And not just now, it's already happened. To your point of why does Locust Street Art exist? The community invested for that to exist, right? And these ecosystems exist because community builds it. And so it's our collective responsibility to carry that on, even when communities are no longer able to support themselves.
And I think to that point too, it's important to recognize the value of community coming in, to fill the gaps when our federal and our government structures are not doing what they're, meant to do. And I think, Emma, your story about, how Locust Street brings together so many diverse people from socioeconomic backgrounds, I think that is really so emblematic of how important cultivating a diverse, people think about diverse in a very sort of one-dimensional term, but diversity across socioeconomic status, across networks, across interests, that becomes a way to supplement, what's missing from our federal and local governments. If you have the business owners, if you have those in tech, if you have, those that are in other industries that maybe are more lush with resources or have other things that they can offer the arts and cultural, bringing all of these different groups together to help supplement and fill in the gaps is the way that we respond to, the current situation where we're seeing our government fail, the arts and cultural sector specifically. It involves other individuals in the community to step up and to see that there are multiple roles that can be played to sustain the arts.
Absolutely. And to everyone's point also, it brings community together because people show up. And so it's really important, and now I want to talk to the listeners because we've talked about all different community spaces, and I want to bring the art crawl into this because it's such an opportunity for you to get out into your community. It's not just our community, it's your community also. And so it's really, really important especially with this art crawl, I mean, they're going to be at King Urban Life Center. They're going to be at Jericho Road, Open Buffalo, Peace Prints of Western New York. And some of these organizations you may not even have heard of before, but they've been here. King Urban Life Center is one of the reasons why I'm able to academically be here today, because I was the first inaugural class of that charter school in a point in time where public school wasn't going to work out for me. And so they gave me an opportunity that, and, you know, at the time they had, and they still up to a few years ago, I think recently had a partnership with Houghton College, that I saw college students in a college campus for the first time ever in my life, a place that I probably would have never seen if it wasn't for that partnership. And so how important is it for community-based initiative schools even, for them to be included in community that you are visiting and understanding the impact that they have. And you never know who's touched by it. To your point of, we're all neighbors in Buffalo. We're just like 1 degree of separation away from each other. And you never know what program saved somebody's life, what happened here, where they got an opportunity, where they saw something that they never would have seen before. And so it's so important that we uplift these spaces. And I want to say that in a way that we have to hold the city to investing in the arts. We know that the funding, we know the budget's tricky right now. We understand all of that. It's not a time for the arts to fall by the wayside. It's just not. In fact, I think by this very conversation, we've proven that it actually needs to be here more now than ever.
Absolutely.
And so I just want to reiterate that. I won't get at this point too much into the details of the budget and everything. We're working on it. We thank, you know, some folks that have been trying to change the tides in this area, and we hope that we can continue to work on that progress and do so. Please, Heather, if you want to add something to that.
One way that we, and it's true, like there are future conversations we can have about the nitty gritty of it, about how longstanding the disinvestment in our local arts ecosystem has been from a variety of different players. But rather than, you know, we don't need to talk about the numbers, those exist, but it's really more about like the ethos and the mentality. And I guess what I want to lift up especially is there's going to be more larger organizations who are going to be getting scared and, you know, kind of experiencing the precarity that frontline arts organizations have dealt with every year. You know what it made me think of? It made me think of that meme of, it's from a movie, but it's of a guy saying first time as he's about to be, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's like, right,
about.
yeah. First time, like, oh, you're scared, you know, and it's kind of like, that's what I'm kind of taking away from that. What we say at Frontline Arts Buffalo is that the pie, if the pie is not big enough for everyone, then we need a bigger pie, right? And so one thing that I've seen happens historically is that especially fearful organizations, because of precarity, try to scramble up more of the pie, right? They're trying to say we need more of the pie because we really need it. But I will be honest, if the big organizations do that, they will get their slices of the pie at the expense of our smaller frontline arts organizations. And one only needs to look at the past 10 years of arts funding in this city to see that it has gone overwhelmingly to one organization. There has been more arts funding coming to this city than had in a long time at the state level, in a way that actually took money away from our smaller frontline arts organizations. And it was kind of even doubly difficult because we saw this really large organization duplicate our services, right? They built a throwing studio for the first time and a media lab for the first time, and really kind of took on more than they had historically, despite the fact that we really were trying to have those conversations with everybody all along that, you know, they were eating well kind of at our expense. And so I can see how moving forward, organizations in a precarity mindset who have never been there before might feel inclined to actually kind of do some of the same things to save themselves, right? But if we just save ourselves, then nobody's going to make it, right? And so I guess I really want to lean into this ecosystem. And also lift up some past work the Burchfield has done, right? So there's a number of years where the Burchfield had this artist support grant. I don't know if they still do, but it was many years of small grants, micro grants to artists so that they could help seal their deal of local exhibitions and stuff. And so I think we need more of that. And I guess what I want to just leave this conversation with is a hopeful reminder that there is enough pie for all of us, especially if we all advocate together. And honestly, try to make sure that we're making space for everyone else at the table too.
And to that point, you know, the scarcity mindset and that scrambling is, pillar of capitalism.
Yep.
But we've already seen when investment gets concentrated in certain areas. And the whole point of this is that we're creating an ecosystem that's actually within communities everywhere, right? And so if we concentrate funding into only certain organizations that we like, or we like visiting, or we think is in a better neighborhood, oh, well, people can just go there. Actually, they can't. Maybe they don't even feel welcome there.
Or maybe they've never been there. If you don't go to a museum as a child, you don't go as an adult. That's really statistically proven.
But I want to jump in and just talk a little bit about the ways that the Burchfield has and continues to respond to all of these things, because being a community-based organization, we want to cultivate a space and cultivate a reputation where folks don't feel that the only way that they can engage with us is by coming into our space, right? You talked about the artist support grants. We've been doing that and extending that to students, right? We have done so many collaborative programs with the Frontline arts organizations, including, organizations like Squeaky Wheel, Just Buffalo Literary Center, the Buffalo Public Schools, BCAT, who just moved into a beautiful space downtown, supporting their work, not duplicating the work that they're doing, but elevating the programs that exist, and most importantly, paying administrative costs to the organizations we're partnering with, paying the students so that they feel that their work is valuable and that they get a feel of what it means to be supported as a working artist. Those are all things that we don't necessarily feel the need to publicize or grandstand about, because we're doing that work every single day. And so I want to use that as an opportunity to lift up not just the art crawl event, but the broader initiative of welcoming spaces. So this was an idea that came in collaboration with us in Partnership for the Public Good as a way to help bridge connections between the arts communities and nonprofit communities, to get these groups in conversation with each other and to support the work that nonprofits are doing under PPG's organizations, but also the work of our local artists. And to clarify, all of the artists were paid.
Yes, I misspoke earlier. Yeah, they were commissioned works.
So they weren't commissioned, but we purchased the works from them with the support of the Community Foundation, as a way, again, to build this ecosystem where we're normalizing the fact that artists deserve to be paid for their work, right? And so we purchased 10 works of art from 10 local artists, and then working with PPG, placing those works into selected nonprofit spaces. And these are, and you spoke about this earlier, Deja, these are nonprofits that are doing incredible work in the community, offering free and low cost health services, re-entry services, job placement assistance, food security, right? All of these organizations, this was an opportunity to elevate and support them by helping to bring art into their space, to help beautify their offices, to have their visitors and their constituents that they work with see themselves reflected in the work that's on the walls, to see art that feels encouraging and beautiful, and hopefully just brings a little bit of pleasantry to their days. And so originally this exhibition was up at the Burchfield. We had the PPG partners come in and sort of go through a ranking process to kind of let us know what works they felt would resonate the most with their constituents and work the best for their spaces. We paired the artworks and the institutions to everyone's. We tried to get everyone their first three choices, but the power of ranking, it doesn't always work out that way. But everyone was so incredibly happy with the work that they got. Seeing it installed in these community spaces has been incredible. And so the art crawl on Saturday, September 13th is really the culmination of that, right? It's an opportunity for each organization to have a sort of open house where visitors can come in, not just to see the work, but to learn about the organizations, what they're doing, to connect with their teams. And hopefully that fosters new connections, that fosters new collaborations. And it's a way, again, to continue to grow our hope and our continued mission of expanding beyond just the museum walls, bringing the work of regional artists, of Buffalo's artists into the community, and really creating a footprint for the Burchfield Penney, not just in our beautiful space on Elmwood, but throughout all of Western New York. And this is just one initiative in our broader initiative to cultivate community galleries throughout Western New York. And so I'm just so excited and grateful that we were able to partner with PPG on this. And I hope that this is something that we can continue to cultivate and grow in the years to come.
Absolutely. And we're just so excited. And I thank you all for coming in today to talk about this. And we literally talked as we can still keep talking.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, oh no, this episode's long now. But I just, oh gosh, it was so healing for me. I had such a hard week this week, and like it just was so important. And it just reiterates the purpose of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I hope our listeners also get that feeling when they listen to this. And please participate in the conversation. We'd love to see your comments. Life is hard. Go see some art. Go make some art. Please come to the art crawl. Go to Locust Street Art. They said it's free. There's a lot of other free programs at Frontline arts organizations all over Buffalo. We have to make sure we're supporting them, and we're really showing what that community impact is and why it's so important. And for you to be advocating in your own networks about it as well. We can't just fight for this on our own. Everyone has to see the importance of this and be letting whoever is in their ecosystem know why it's important. And that's how we really use collective power to make sure that we keep these institutions alive. So I really thank you all for being here today and just having such an impactful conversation. It was amazing.
Thank you so much, Deja.
Awesome. This has been The Public Good, and this is Deja James from Partnership from the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 380 partner organizations to make a better Buffalo and Western New York region. We will see you again next week. Thank you.